2431 City Gates. The last stop Aiko decided to make was on the outskirts of the city, far away from the lake. She and Little Ling rode an open carriage pulled by an echo, the driver sitting on the bench in a relaxed pose. The boy was looking around curiously, having spent most of his life close to the lake. The street they were following was one of the main thoroughfares of Bastion, cutting all the way from the shore to the city gates. There were plenty of fascinating sights. The gates themselves were not very impressive, though, in fact, there was no gate at all, just a wide open space where the departing caravans gathered before embarking on the perilous journey across the dire reaches of the Dream Realm, and where the battered arriving caravans stopped. Some of the caravans carried settlers, some carried cargo. Out of the latter, some were loaded with necessary resources that the domain supplied to periphery cities in the east, while some belonged to entrepreneurial merchants. Servicing the caravans was an industry in and of itself. So, a lively bazaar had grown around the gate, with countless stalls, plentiful inns, and shops of all kinds. In fact, the bazaar was a little town in and of itself, with many people living here on a permanent basis. On both sides of the non-existent gate, tall walls separated Bastion from the wild expanse beyond. The walls were tall, but not very impressive either. In truth, they were barely more than mounds of compressed earth. That was because the construction was still in process, and this was merely a temporary measure. Bastion was a vast domain city, and on top of that, it was situated in the Dream Realm, which might have been settled by humans but not at all tamed. As a result, securing it was a titanic undertaking. The construction of the city wall was of paramount importance, but it was taking time. Humans were no strangers to constructing great barriers around their cities, but this was not the waking world with its sophisticated technology and expansive infrastructure. Building anything in the Dream Realm was much harder because people did not have powerful machines, automated factories, and enormous smelting plants here. Instead, though, they had awakened masters and saints, which was why building a wall around a city as sprawling as Bastion was even possible. No two awakened were the same, though, so the walls of Bastion were a bit peculiar. Some of the sections had been built out of compressed earth, some out of stone, some out of wood or metal. Some were even composed of many trunks of towering trees that had fused together, while some were made of thorns and brambles. A small army of awakened patrolled the walls day and night, and a larger army of builders was still hard at work turning them into an impregnable fortification. Woo! Little Ling took in the lively sight of the bazaar with wide eyes. So many people, and those echoes. Wow! Disembarking from the carriage, Aiko offered him her hand and smiled. Lots of sense, yes. Don't get overwhelmed. The boy sniffed the air a few times and beamed. Yummy, 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 yummy. Auntie Aiko, can we eat? She nodded seriously. Of course. In a bit. With that, she glanced around the bazaar herself. While Little Ling was busy discerning the most delicious scent, Aiko turned to the carriage driver and pointed to one of the buildings nearby. A new inn. Since when was it here? Such a prime spot. The driver shook his head. That one is not an inn. Aiko gave him a strange look. The man was exceedingly handsome and held himself with gallant poise. It was quite strange to see someone so distinguished driving an echo carriage, to say the least. She let out a mental sign. Well, of course the driver was handsome, gallant, and dreamy. He was Master Quentin, after all. Aiko knew that if something happened, Little Ling would be able to defend himself better than she could. Nothing really compared with the strength of a transcendent, child or not, while she was a measly awakened. Still, she was not going to take Effie's precious son out on the town without reliable protection. So, Quentin had been demoted to a carriage driver for a day, taking them around Bastion since morning. Of course, the man did not complain. Reminding herself that he was taken, Aiko suppressed the impulse to bat her eyelashes at him and raised an eyebrow. Oh, Quentin nodded. It's a church. She frowned slightly. You mean one of those weird meditation halls where people definitely do not pray to Neffis? He chuckled. No, this one is an actual church. Church of the Moon, or something like that. It's a tiny cult. These guys are mostly harmless, too. They used to be a bunch of wanderers, traveling with caravans and offering blessings for safe journeys. Things seem to be looking up for them, though, considering that they've been able to buy this building. Aiko blinked a few times. Church of the Moon, as in, they worship Beast God. The dead one. Quentin shook his head. No, they just worship the moon. If you ask me, traveling and guidance is more of a storm god thing. But I am not well versed in inventing religions, so what do I know? Aiko studied the modest church, which did not look any more opulent than the surrounding inns, and pursed her lips. Shame, I had my eyes on that location. Gods, these weirdos really do grow like mushrooms. Where are they all coming from, anyway? I have never even heard about cults being a thing before. Quentin nodded. The government used to be strict about it. Plus, it is not easy to muster religious zeal in a world where gods are dead, and the nightmare spell exists. But things are different now. Lady Nephes was right to share the truth of what fate awaits Earth with the people, but not everyone can bear the weight of truth. So, people are turning to all kinds of things to soothe their fear. Granted, he turned and glanced at the distant silhouette of the Ivory Island drifting high in the sky above the city. Most are turning to immortal flame. Why believe in anything else if there is a literal goddess looking over you from above? Aiko nodded. Well, or an eccentric demigod looking up at you from the shadows. She gave Quentin a long look. Still, this Church of the Moon. Did you make a report about it? He smiled faintly. There are too many tiny sects popping up here and there these days to make an individual report on each one. We've been compiling information to make a batch report after the solstice, though, when things calm down a little. Aiko nodded again. Good. I want to know everything there is to know about these harmless cultists. You know what's at stake. Quentin studied her for a bit, then sighed. Lady Aiko, you know, it would be much easier on us if we knew what it is that we are looking out for, exactly. She shook her head and looked away. Some things are too perilous to know. And some things become more perilous the more people know about them. There is a reason why Boss is keeping everyone in the dark, so just trust his judgment. Aiko knew more than most, but even she had not been told everything. The threat-changing star in the Lord of Shadow seemed so wary of was apparently of a kind that should never be spoken about aloud. Auntie Aiko, look, look, little Ling pulled on her hand, pointing to the road excitedly. There, a battered caravan was approaching the city. Aiko smiled faintly. 2432 Dream Realm Caravan. Seeing a caravan coming in was always impressive, which was why Aiko had taken Ling Ling to the bazaar for the last stop of their little adventure. Wow, the boy was properly entranced. The Dream Realm was vast, and the network of roads between the nascent human cities was in its infant state. More than that, the wilderness teemed with nightmare creatures and horrors of all kinds, so it took preparation and great effort to reach the destination unscathed or reach it at all. The situation was somewhat better in the west, where the River of Tears served as a medium connecting the citadels in its basin, but here in the east, the caravans had to be formidable forces to courageous the harrowing expanse of the Dream Realm. Out there in front of The City, a long chain of colossal echoes was moving slowly across the rugged terrain. Each was as tall as a building. The leading beast was especially impressive, towering above the rest, with scarlet scales covering its body and 3 long horns crowning its colossal head. The echoes were clad in heavy armor, each pulling an enormous wagon behind them. The wagons themselves were heavily armored, as well, resembling rolling fortresses. Their great wheels crushed the soil as they turned, and seasoned awakened warriors kept watch on the battlements, bearing scars of innumerable battles. The wagons bore many scars, too, some old, some new. Their armor was bent and battered, torn in some places, with the enchanted wood beneath splintered and charred. The awakened warriors were covered in dust and dirt, their weariness and exhaustion palpable even from a distance. Even the echoes seemed fatigued, the colossal chains connecting them to the wagons rattling dully. Still, it was an amazing sight to behold, especially for a child. Auntie Aiko, these echoes are even bigger than me. Oh, I wonder how heavy those wagons are. Do you think I can pull one? Aiko glanced at little Ling with a smile. Wolfie, let's not talk about your potential career as a wolf of burden, all right? I doubt that your mom will be happy to learn that her precious baby is dreaming about running away with a caravan to pull wagons. In fact, she might take my head clean off my shoulders if she does. And I want to keep my head firmly attached to my body, thank you very much. Little Ling giggled. Auntie, Mommy doesn't have to know, does she? Aiko stared at him in shock and outrage. What? He knows how to lie now. Who taught him? Which lowlife was being a bad influence on this pure, innocent boy? She was going to bankrupt them. Your mom might not know, but Auntie Cassie will know. She knows everything, so be a good boy and never lie to your mother. Aiko huffed in indigestion. Little Ling glanced at her and grinned. Should I tell her about how we convinced that one uncle to sign an witty contract with you today, Auntie? She cleared her throat and turned away. On second thought, what Effie doesn't know can't hurt her. Your mommy is a very busy person, so we shouldn't burden her with every little detail, should we? She raised her hand and hastily pointed forward. Look, they're approaching. The caravan reached the vicinity of the city. The colossal echoes stopped, and the wagons came to a halt. The entire bazaar suddenly boiled, innumerable people rushing forward to witness the arrival. Since everyone here made a living by servicing the caravans, this was the moment they had been waiting for. No one rushed to leave the boundary of the city, though. First, the arriving caravan had to be inspected with the help of special memories and sorceress tools. It did not take very long, though. Eventually, the guards finished their task and let the tired travelers through. The wagons were brought to the empty space in front of the gates, the echoes were dismissed, and the long process of unloading the cargo started. In the chaotic mess that followed, Aiko found an imposing man in monster hide armor and waved elegantly at him. The man was a master and the owner of the returned caravan. He had been discussing something with a few of his subordinates, but shooed them away when Aiko approached. His low, confident voice sounded a little surprised. Miss Aiko, I thought our meeting was not until tomorrow. I did not expect you to meet us personally. She smiled. Well, I happen to be in the neighborhood. Why put off something for tomorrow when it can be done today, right? The man lingered for a while, then glanced at Little Ling in confusion. And this is? Aiko maintained a polite expression. Oh, this is Saint Ling. My dear friend's offspring. Wolfie, say hi to Uncle. Little Ling grimaced and turned his nose away. I don't wanna. This mister smells funny. Aiko's smile turned a little forced. Ling Ling, don't be rude. Also, don't just go around sniffing people. The little boy just shrugged unhappily. She studied him for a few seconds, then turned to the caravan master. Please forgive his manners. He is usually well behaved. You know, when he's at home. With his mom, Saint Athena, raised by wolves. Steward of the East. Oh, what was I talking about? Right, the special cargo you delivered. I am ready to take it off your hands right away. Let's say 1,000 soul shards. The man studied Little Ling for a moment or two, then smiled widely. What a boisterous boy. Sorry, kid, I've been on the road for months. You know what they say about the smell of adventure. Well, it's more of a stench, really. You get used to it, though. Then, he glanced at Aiko and nodded. 1,000 soul shards sounds about right. Shall we sign the documents? Aiko's smile froze. She glanced at Little Ling, then back at the caravan master. After remaining silent for a few seconds, she chuckled. Why, naturally, time is money, right? Ah, but before that, I wanted to show you something. She raised her hand, summoning a memory. At the same time, she moved her fingers to form a shadow sign. Some distance away, Quentin's eyes suddenly turned sharp. Little Ling not liking his smell was already suspicious enough. Aiko maintained a relaxed expression. But a merchant who doesn't haggle. Ring the alarm. Something was very, very wrong with this master. 2433 Swindling a horror. The caravan master, whoever or whatever he was, shifted his gaze, looking at the memory forming on Aiko's hand curiously. That is an unusual memory, Miss Aiko. Indeed, while most memories formed from sparks of light, some were different. The memories crafted by the spellsmiths of fallen valor, for example, manifested in a whirlwind of scarlet sparks instead. There were stranger ones out there, as well, even among those memories bestowed upon awakened by the spell. Those were usually quite special, albeit not always more potent than the rest. The memories crafted by the Lord of Shadows after his supposed death, however, always appeared like a torrent of darkness. Aiko smiled. Well, you know how the spell is. It likes to be fancy sometimes. The caravan master chuckled and glanced at her with the same curious smile. Indeed I do. We, merchants, have to know these matters by heart. People assign additional value to the strangest things, after all. A flashy memory can cost 10 times the price despite not offering any additional benefits. I prefer my memories powerful rather than flamboyant, personally, but that doesn't mean that I wouldn't want to get my hands on a couple of the latter and sell them for a fortune. He laughed. Aiko's smile was a little forced by. Then, the caravan master seemed perfectly human. That was the creepiest part, really. How flawlessly he blended with the crowd, no different from any other person she had met. But Aiko was convinced that he was not, in fact, human. That was what made her skin crawl more than encountering the creature itself did. But what memory are you so eager to show me? You wouldn't be summoning a weapon, would you, Miss Aiko? There was no threat in his voice, and yet, Aiko suddenly felt cold. She raised an eyebrow. A weapon? Goodness gracious, surely not. What am I going to do with a weapon in these heels? She wasn't lying, either. Her stilettos were indeed not what one would want to wear in a ferocious battle. Granted, Aiko could float and fly as she wished, so that wasn't an issue. Still, she was a lover, not a fighter. Well, the lover part wasn't going so well for her, to be honest, but that was beyond the point. Who cares? I love money. Now that's true romance. Finally, a hand mirror made of polished silver appeared in her hand. It was quite a stylish little accessory, etched with gorgeous patterns and inlaid with finely carved pieces of obsidian. The caravan master studied it carefully. Not a weapon, after all. He glanced at her and smiled. Still, it seemed that I've been discovered. How vexing. I thought I performed the role of this human well. I even came while the star is gone, and the shadow it casts is gone with her. Aiko shivered. Not a human, then. Her suspicion, unfortunately, had turned out to be correct. How did this thing pass the inspection, damn it? What stood in front of her was not the ascended merchant she had been supposed to meet. Instead, it was a vessel of the Great Terror, Skinwalker. The forces of humanity were currently locked in a losing war against the detestable creature in the eastern quadrant, where it was supposed to be contained. The fact that a vessel of Skinwalker had made it all the way to Bastion, past every countermeasure put in place to prevent just that eventuality, was concerning. Actually, it was frightening. Aiko forced out a smile. Whatever do you mean? With her other hand, she pulled little Ling closer. The vessel of Skinwalker studied her for a few seconds, then smiled politely. I am curious. How did you see through my charade? Aiko felt an impulse to mock the nightmare creature, even if she was powerless in front of it. She could have told him how little Ling had disliked his scent, and more importantly, how he completely failed to understand what kind of people merchants were. In front of Aiko of the Shadow Clan, of all people. The distressing creature had been steadily improving its ability to mimic human behavior, cunningly making one countermeasure invented to contain it after another meaningless, but it still failed to truly fathom what it meant to be human. It couldn't. All Skinwalker could do was imitate humans while not truly understanding what it was imitating. In a sense, it did the opposite of what the practitioners of Shadow Dance were supposed to do. Not that there were numerous of those, even with all the training. In any case, Aiko really wanted to gloat. But why would she explain what exactly it was that the Skinwalker had done wrong to the creepy bastard? So that it could learn from its mistakes and perform better next time. Yeah, no, I am not giving this thing a heroic monologue. After all, I am not a hero. I am a babysitter. For today, little Ling hugged Aiko, sensing that there was something wrong. Some distance away, Quentin was cautiously making his way toward them. Returning the Skinwalker's smile, she glanced at her hand mirror. Let me finish explaining about this memory first. I summoned it for a reason, you. No, she turned the mirror this way and that, casting bright reflections on the cobblestones. This here is a prototype of a memory my boss has been developing in his free time. Communication is a serious problem in the dream realm, actually. Sure, the immortal flame is already working on a solution, a dreamscape for the dream realm, or some such. Making it safe from all the horrors of this world is proving to be a problem in and of itself, though. Hence, we came up with our own solution. Ah, if only there was a way to mass-produce them. But I am getting off topic. The vessel of the Skinwalker tilted its head. Communication. Are you hoping to commune with me, awakened? Unity. Community. Yes. Aiko coughed. Thanks. But you are not my type, sorry. Sadly, it's not like I can do anything against you, can I? I mean, I am a mere awakened, and you are a great terror. What am I supposed to do? Oh, but I do feel the need to inform you of something. She pointed to little Ling, who was clinging to her. This here is my dear friend's child. And my friend is a real she-wolf when it comes to protecting her boy. Coincidentally, today, we learned that everyone in this city loves his mom very much. Do you know why? Because she is Saint Athena, raised by wolves, steward of the East, the war beast. You should know her well, considering how numerous of your vessels she has destroyed. Aiko drew little Ling closer and covered his eyes with her hand. Then, she smiled radiantly. Right, returning to the memory. It has a really awful name, so I'll spare you the pain of hearing it. I mean, I am perfectly capable of coming up with an awful name of my own. Today, let's call it. Aiko paused for a moment and then said in a solemn tone. Call mommy. And just as she did, Something thundered in the sky above them. 2434 The terrible price of saving the world. Aiko had not been bluffing when she said that she had no use for a weapon. She was neither a warrior nor had any ambition of becoming one, but that did not mean that she was harmless. After all, she was also a former member of the Dreamer Army. She had survived the Forgotten Shore, and it was not by accident. What, did you think that running a gambling den in the damn Bright Castle was a laid-back occupation? It certainly hadn't. The memory Aiko had summoned was a communication mirror the members of the Shadow Clan used when on missions. It allowed them to talk to each other remotely, or listen in on conversations if the mirror was hidden in some dark place in advance. Not that there weren't better ways of eavesdropping on people. Of course, Aiko did not really need the mirror to get in touch with Effie and inform her of the dire situation they were in. Cassie would already know, which meant that Effie had already been informed. It was a little creepy to know that Cassie could be watching her at any given moment, but in rare cases like this one, it was also comforting. If anything, Aiko could feel honored that she was a high priority mark among many people the blind seer was using as HERIs. In any case, Aiko needed the silver mirror for a different reason. Apart from allowing those who possessed them to communicate, the mirrors were also able to reflect what was in front of them over a distance. The other person just needed to have a matching memory, which Effie did. Aiko's boss had woven that particular enchantment in a moment of petty vindictiveness, mumbling something about stealing that bastard's tricks in an unhinged tone. She had an inkling of who the aforementioned bastard was, and sometimes wondered what the poor man had done to get on her boss's naughty list. It had to be something major, considering that dropping a cursed demon on his head did not seem to have satisfied Sunny. What mattered at the moment, though, was that Aiko could use the mirror to reflect her surroundings to Effie. In other words, what she wanted to relay was not a warning that they were in trouble. It was targeting data. Countless kilometers away, at the top of the great castle, raised by wolves had turned north and summoned her spear. Then, she took careful aim, and tossed it into the sky with a low roar. A hurricane rose, ripping the flags hoisted above the keep to shreds and making people cower. While Aiko was talking to the vessel of the Skinwalker, the spear was ripping up the sky. It crossed the distance a mundane human would have needed days to cross on foot in less than a minute. By the time it arrived, Aiko had already covered Little Ling's eyes with a hand. It was not out of fear of the Skinwalker. Rather, it was because a little boy had no business seeing what would happen next. As something thundered above them, the vessel of the Great Terror glanced up. That was the last thing it ever did. When the spear fell from the sky, striking the former caravan master with flawless precision, it did not simply pierce his body. Instead, his body was simply pulverized, turning into a cloud of fine crimson haze. The spear pierced the cobblestones next, causing a small earthquake to rattle the bazaar and sending a deep fracture running FGOM the point where its tip struck the ground to the great wagons of the battered caravan. One of them tilted when its armored wheel exploded into a storm of splinters, and then toppled with a deafening groan. The walls of the little church Quentin had mentioned cracked. Far away, above the lake, rapid figures were already leaping from the emerald meadows of the Ivory Island. Those were the fire keepers, rushing to the city gates. Of course, Effie was probably going to arrive much sooner. There was no telling if this vessel of the Skinwalker was the only one that had avoided detection, after all. Any member of the caravan could be a disguised nightmare creature. No, actually, the Skinwalker had accidentally revealed its ability to dodge the sorcery that had been keeping it out of human citadels so far, which meant that anyone in Bastion could be a vessel. Anyone in any of the human cities in the Dream Realm could, in fact. So, every human city was going to undergo a period of instability. Martial law would have to be enforced until a new form of sorcery was developed. Then, the cities had to be swept, and any vessel discovered as a result would have to be eliminated. All because Aiko had decided to take Ling Ling on a little adventure. And although she did not know it yet, in the coming weeks, several hidden Skinwalker infestations would indeed be discovered in remote citadels of the eastern reaches of the Dream Realm. Luckily, they would be eradicated before the malignant terror could really grow, thus preventing a terrible calamity. Aiko might not have stumbled into saving the world, but what she had done was not that far off from such a feat. Damn it, I just wanted to have fun on my day off. She glanced down in dejection. Then, her eyes widened in horror. Oh, no, her breathtaking shoes. Some of the pulverized Skinwalker vessel had splattered on them. They were ruined. Damnation, it was a terrible loss. Still unable to see anything because his eyes were covered, Little Ling stirred. Huh, what's a damnation, Auntie? She bit her lip, then said in a teary tone. What? Nothing. Forget you heard anything. Little Ling grew quiet for a moment, then shifted, trying to get out of her embrace. Is damnation one of those bad words? It is, isn't it? Aiko paled. I said forget it, Wolfie. You didn't hear anything. He dropped his shoulder. All right, Auntie. I already forgot it. As she pulled him away toward the carriage and gave Quentin a poignant look, Little Ling sighed and added. I really can't remember. Damnation. My memory has gone bad. 2435 full moon. Remembering something he already knew was a peculiar experience, but Sunny was more rattled by learning all over again what Aiko had done at the gates of Bastion. He gritted his teeth. Aiko. Taught Little Ling a curse word. What was she thinking about? Granted, she had also uncovered a dire truth about the Skinwalker, plunged the entire human domain into the jaws of martial law for a couple of weeks, and prevented multiple cities from either sustaining awful losses or falling entirely. But that was beside the point. He's only 6, for spell's sake. What kind of vulgar good, for nothings is she hanging around with, to use strong language in front of a child? He seethed for a few seconds, then took a deep breath and shook his head. No, it doesn't matter. I'll deal with Aiko later, there are more urgent matters I must attend to at the moment. Grimacing, Sunny nodded with determination and continued on his way. He only took a few steps, though, when another memory came to the surface of his mind. Sunny froze. Neffys did WH. Actually, never mind. That is exactly what Neffys would do. Why am I even surprised? Letting out a hollow chuckle, Sunny glanced up and then resumed walking. So, she went fishing in the lake without me, huh? How heartless. Several weeks earlier, Neffys was sitting at the edge of the Ivory Island, watching a sea of stars shimmer in the dark sky above Bastion. Tonight, just like the previous night, parts of the city were illuminated by the glow of electric street lights. She was glad to see her people taking another step toward prosperity here in the dream realm. But because of it, the stars seemed dimmer than they had been before. That filled her with a faint sense of regret. The stars might have become more distant, but the pale disk of the full moon slowly traveling across the surface of the tranquil lake looked closer than it had ever been before. Tonight was the third and last night when the full moon would rise above Bastion this month. For these 3 nights, sailing on the lake was forbidden, and people were kept away from its shore. That was because when the full moon rose, the boundary between reality and illusion grew thin here in Bastion, and the horror imprisoned in the ruins of the true castle strained to exert its dreadful influence from beyond the reflections. So, Neffys had to stay in the city during the full moon to guard it. Strangely enough, for her, these 3 dangerous nights were usually a time of rest and recuperation. She spent most of her time on the battlefield, leading the forces of humanity against the tide of nightmares threatening to swallow them all. Despite the hidden presence of a cursed demon, the sight of a full moon promised peace and serenity. Granted, she wasn't used to spending these moonlit nights alone. Sunny was usually with her, either by her side or hiding in her shadow. Neffys had grown used to his presence without even knowing it. Now that he was gone, his absence felt strangely unnatural. She was surprised to find herself missing him, even if he had only been gone for a day. Who would have thought I'd find myself feeling these emotions one day? It was peculiar, indeed. Not at all like her. But it wasn't an unwelcome feeling. In fact, the sweet pain of missing someone made her feel hopeful. It made her believe that there was some life left, still, in her scorched and arid heart. So, she tried to enjoy the unfamiliar sense of faint melancholy. Sunny had been forced to leave because of unforeseen, albeit not entirely unexpected, complications in Ravenheart. The incarnation he had sent there, as well as Kai, was now missing. More than that, a cursed tyrant and 2 beasts had escaped a prison made for them by the Demon of Dread, only to end up in another seconds later, thanks to Sishin's quick thinking. Nobody knew what would escape the eerie Jade Board next, though, so the sovereigns had to make their way to the Jade Palace. Sunny had gone first, taking Cassie with him. Neffys herself was going to join them once the full moon was over. Tomorrow, she would see him again. Looking at the reflection of the moon shining on the surface of the lake, Neffys wondered if she would feel something then. Would she be happy, or simply pleased? Would she feel nothing at all? Would the peculiar sorrow in her heart go away? At that moment, the waters below rippled. The pale disk suddenly seemed distorted and eerie, gazing at her from below like a round eye plagued by a white cataract. The lake stirred, and a series of waves rolled outward, climbing higher and higher up the shore. Neffys tilted her head, watching it all transpire somberly. So, it chose tonight to show its hand. What an unfortunate coincidence it was. So unfortunate, in fact, that Nephis was inclined to believe that it was no coincidence at all. Had the cursed demon waited until only one of the sovereigns was left in the city to try and escape? In any case, the timing could not have been worse. Humanity was drowning in calamities, surrounded by peril and enemies on all sides. In the waking world, more and more gates were opening each month, and the population centers were barely holding on against the flood of nightmare creatures. The eastern quadrant was balancing on the verge of an utter disaster. The war against the Skinwalker was not going well, the infection was spreading, and humans had to retreat further and further, abandoning their land, settlements, and entire cities. In the dream realm, the hunt for new citadels was proving to be less fruitful than she had hoped. Legions of Awakened were clearing the interior of the two vast enclaves from abominations while simultaneously exploring the far reaches to the east, the frozen hells to the west, and the dreadful waters of the misty ocean to the south, while in the north, a legion of shadows was doing the same in the scorched tangle of a burned forest. Mordred's location was still unknown. Astarion still remained a worrisome mystery. And now, all of this was pressing down on Nephis, pushing her to the ground. The weight of the entire world, 2 worlds, even, was resting on her shoulders, making her struggle to keep herself from falling to her knees. And then there were the quiet whispers of the many souls burning like stars in the vast expanse of her domain. Their longing washed over her day and night, its pressure even more overwhelming, unbearable, at times. Nephis pursed her lips. Sunny was not by her side. Neither was Cassie. Kai was missing, and Effie had gone to the western quadrant to deal with the Category 4 gate crisis there. There was no one Nephis could trust to have her back in a battle against a cursed demon here in Bastion. Not tonight, at least. So, she would have to face it alone. She would have to carry the weight and keep walking forward, one arduous step at a time. Letting out a quiet sigh, Nephis slowly stood up and glanced at the dark lake with white flames dancing in her eyes. 2 breathtaking white wings manifested behind her, chasing away the darkness of the night. It is just a cursed demon. What was there to worry about? An aloof, distant smile twisted her lips. Summoning the blessing, she took a step forward and plunged into the darkness. 2436. Lost Heaven. A bright star ignited in the dark sky above Bastion. The people, those of them who were still on the streets, busy with fruitful endeavors or simply being festive after a hard day of work, glanced up in surprise, their eyes igniting with wonder. The star fell from the sky, growing bigger and brighter. Soon enough, it was like a flaming white meteor plummeting from the lightless heavens to the ground. Its light illuminated the night, chasing the darkness away and making the full moon shining high above seem pale in comparison. The silver radiance of the moon could not compete with the incinerating white glow of the falling star. The night could not compete with it, either. For a moment, it was as if the sun had risen above Bastion in the middle of the night, bringing with itself the stark beauty of daylight. Then, before people had the time to get scared, the flaming white meteor struck the surface of the lake. There was a blinding flash, and a gigantic fountain of boiling water rose into the air, evaporating into a vast cloud as it did. The entire lake shone for a moment, as if illuminated from within, and then grew dark once more. Just like that, the falling star disappeared without a trace. The waters of the lake surged and rippled, its surface growing restless. The perfect disk of the full moon reflected on its surface was shattered and erased, replaced by scattered fragments of silver light. On the other side of the reflection, Nephis shot out from the dark abyss of the lake and soared into the eerie sky of the true Bastion, her radiant wings unfolding to shine blindingly in the pale radiance of the shattered moon. She rose high above the vast ruins of the great castle, looking down as white flames danced in her eyes, suffused her skin, and licked her hair. Her fiery gaze felt cold and ruthless. There was no mercy in that gaze, no hesitation, no doubt, no hope of salvation. Just a firm and inescapable promise of being burned to ash by the boundless tide of purifying flames. She regarded the ruins of True Bastion dispassionately. The broken castle had been reduced to rubble by the battle between Morgan and Mordred. The lake, which had run dry as a result of their drawn-out confrontation, was full of water once again, shimmering eerily in the silver light of the shattered moon. Deep cracks ran through the mountain on which the ruins of the castle lay, full of stagnant water and overgrown with scarlet moss. There was a creature waiting for her in the heart of the ruins. A shapeless mountain of gray flesh towered above the rubble, covered by moss and brimming with 100 revolting limbs that rose from it like a harrowing forest. A frightening, eerie presence emanated from the grotesque creatures, making the light of the moon seem reluctant to touch it. As a result, the creature was surrounded by a shroud of darkness. The winds avoided it, as well, so nothing disturbed the dead silence enveloping the ruins. It was as if the world itself was trying to escape it, revolted and frightened by the ancient fiend. As Nephis looked, innumerable grotesque eyes suddenly revealed themselves on the grey mass of the cursed demon, opening to look back at her with a dreadful, frighteningly alien lack of emotion. She held its gaze for a few long seconds, then folded her wings and dove to the ground. Landing on the edge of the water, some distance away from the nightmare creature, Nephis took a deep breath and then headed in its direction with steady steps. Something peculiar happened then, though. There was a rustle, as if the ruins themselves let out a long sigh, and then, a distant voice resounded from the depths of the crumbling castle. I had a dream. The voice spoke in a long-forgotten language, sounding eerily human despite its low and otherworldly timbre. Nephis continued to walk, her expression never changing. The voice spoke again, full of indescribable, faint emotion. I dreamt of being whole again. The innumerable appalling EYES moved faintly, peering into her soul. I dreamt of the sun being kind again. An eerie note found its way into the distant voice, making the world shiver. I dreamt of having wings again. The harrowing forest of skeletal limbs stirred, blackened and charred. You are not the one who forced that hateful dream upon me. You are not the one who stole it from me, either. Are you? Nephis continued to walk, offering no answer. And yet, I cannot forgive you. Those wings of yours, so beautiful. The appalling eyes of the cursed demon grew darker, and its voice grew cold and insidious, full of malice so vast that it made Nephis halt for a moment. Blood of the sun, have you come to burn me? The mountain of grey flesh moved, rippling as pieces of ancient stone turned to dust under its enormous weight. A hollow, mad, frightening laughter resounded above the ruins. Shall I extinguish you, then? Or shall I curse you? Shall I tell you how the sun was destroyed, how our heavens burned, how the land of the moon was swallowed by ash, how we all fell, one after another? Shall I help you become everlasting, ever-changing? The voice whispered then, growing feeble and faint. Like me. Walking forward with a sword in her hand, Nephis answered evenly. I am not interested in talking to you, nightmare creature. Why waste our breaths? The blade of the blessing shone with a blinding light, turning white-hot and luminous. All I am interested in is ending you. So, prepare to die. Raising her sword, Nephis pointed it at the cursed demon. She was a supreme titan whose domain encompassed billions of souls. This creature was an old, broken, fallen god. What right did it have to curse her? A bitter smile twisted her lips. Yes, I have come to burn you. I've come to destroy you. Unlike mine, your pain will be rapid. Be thankful. 2437 Abjuration. Nephis had grown vastly more powerful after attaining supremacy. However, there was nuance to that newfound power, not all of it came easily, and not all of it could be used freely in any situation. Take her supreme aspect ability, for example. Sunny had gained the ability to summon the shades that rested within him into existence, thus becoming a walking army, an army of indestructible shadows that grew with each living being he slayed, no less, which made him a truly frightening existence. Nephis had gained an immensely powerful ability, as well. However, her supreme ability did nothing to strengthen Nephis herself. Instead, it strengthened the subjects of her domain, allowing her to heal and strengthen them with her flames from a distance. Which was why it was truly unfortunate that she had to face the cursed demon alone. Not that there were numerous people out there who could have assisted her in a battle against a cursed nightmare creature. But, naturally, she was never alone, not really. Her domain encompassed all of humanity, after all. Not every mundane human was a part of it, but most were. Among the awakened, meanwhile, only those of the Shadow Clan or those exiled to the penitentiary citadel in Godgrave did not belong to her domain. The rest of them were tied to Nephis, either by their own longing or by being anchored to the gateways her transcendent vassals controlled. Or possibly it was her who was tied to them. She could feel them all, always. The flames of their yearning were like innumerable stars shining in an abyss of boundless darkness, all connected to her soul by strings of starlight. Some stars were distant and cold, so small that, as to almost be non-existent. The others were like enormous bonfires, burning so brightly that their radiance was blinding, and their passion filled the abyss with warmth. There were numerous stars in her domain for Nephis to fathom them all individually, but drowning in their collective enormity was all too easy. Sometimes, she struggled to remember where her own identity ended and their vastness started. In those seconds, the same things that had helped her sustain her humanity helped her maintain her sense of self. Her true name, the precious bonds she had forged with other people. the affection she held in her heart, and most importantly, her own ardent desire, her own longing, her goal. It was peculiar, really. Before, Nefis had been wary of losing her humanity. But now, she was wary of experiencing too much of humanity, all of it, possibly. Of dissolving into the immensity of her domain completely, becoming an elemental force as opposed to a person. Possibly that was how the gods had felt. Possibly that was what being a god meant. A true apotheosis. If so, Nefis wanted nothing to do with it. An element was mighty like a force of nature, but it did not have direction. It did not have conviction. It did not have will. It did not have what it took to achieve what she desired. Walking toward the cursed demon, she infused her will with her desire, forging an unbreakable armor out of it. I am not alone. This creature, though, this creature is alone, and it will die alone, cut down by my sword and burned by my flame. Every day, new stars ignited in the starlit vastness of her domain. And every day, some of them were extinguished forever. Nefis felt the loss of these stars faintly. There were numerous of them to mourn the loss of each individual flame, but she was always aware of how numerous fates were being broken and ground into dust by the ruthless world of the nightmare spell. How numerous hopes and dreams were doomed to stay forever unfulfilled. She suffered the pain of their passing personally. As the cursed demon stirred and surged forward, its long limbs pulling the monstrous mountain of gray flesh across the rubble with breathtaking speed, Nefis took that pain and infused it into her will, forging an uncompromising sword out of it. She felt the cursed demon's own will reshaping the world around them. Trying to reshape Nefis herself, as well. By then, she already knew what this fallen god was, and what power it wielded. There were clues for her to piece together, already. The cursed demon came from the hollows of Godgrave, where it had hidden from the destructive sun for thousands of years. There were hints in what the creature had told her, too, its memories of a gentle sun, of having wings, its scorched, skeletal limbs. But Nefis did not have to guess what her adversary was. Because one of the brightest stars in her domain was Cassie, and while the two of them were far apart, her friend was still with her, seeing things that no other human could. The cursed demon could be called abjuration. It wielded the power of rejection, renouncement, and negation. Anything it denied had no choice but to cease, and everything it refused was doomed to be erased from existence. Its malignant will was frightening, vast as an ocean, and oppressively firm in its insidious malevolence. No wonder Mordred had fled when faced with this distressing creature. If anything, it was a miracle that Sunny's shadow had managed to lull abjuration to sleep. As the mass of gray flesh and charred limbs rushed at her, Nefis channeled her flames into the blessing. The former shadowbound sword focused them into an destructive ray of pure white light, and that light tore the distance between her and the huge nightmare creature in an instant, threatening to cut the grotesque mountain of flesh in half. However, instead, it was simply extinguished, negated by the fallen god's profane authority. Nefis frowned. Her attack had not been resisted, and neither had it been deflected. Instead, it was simply denied, cancelled before ever getting a chance to do damage, as if the very concept of being hurt by her flames had been proclaimed a falsehood by the sinister fiend. And since the cursed demon had proclaimed so, it became the truth. Her hand faltered for a split second. How am I supposed to kill a deity who denies my ability to kill it? The cursed demon was a god, a fallen, corrupted god. And that god did not believe in Nefis. Luckily, she believed in herself. 2438 Concept of humanity. The blinding ray of pure white light struck the towering nightmare creature and was extinguished, denied the power to harm it, rather, vanishing without leaving a trace on the gray flesh of the cursed demon. Time and space themselves bent, allowing its enormous mass to draw near Nefis far more rapidly than it should have been able to. Her wings raised a hurricane, sending her flying back, out of the way of innumerable skeletal limbs that stretched forward, aiming to grab her into a deadly grip. The world that had let the cursed demon pass so rapidly resisted her movement, sapping her momentum and slowing her down. If not for the armor of the will Nefis had forged for herself, she might not have been able to move at all. As it was, she barely avoided the harrowing forest of charred hands, slipping away between the cursed demon's fingers. Flying backward, she gritted her teeth. The nightmare creature had 100 hands, but Nefis only had one sword. And even that sword had proven ineffective against the authority of the fallen god. The authority it possessed was too absolute in its ability to deny her. The ancient horror wielded it both as a shield and as a weapon, both as the lure and as the trap, as well, preventing the adversary from harming it while simultaneously refusing their ability to escape. Nefis frowned. No, her adversary was not simply wielding the authority of abjuration. It personified abjuration, the very concept of forswearing something, thus negating its power and its very existence. That was what will could accomplish when elevated to the very edge of being absolute. How would one fight against an absolute will? Although Nephis did not know it yet, the technique Sunny would use in Ariel's game was to channel and personify a concept that directly opposed the power of his adversary. However, the two of them were entirely different people, and what Sunny could achieve was not what Nephis could or should be striving to emulate. She had her own path to forge. Just then, the cursed demon's innumerable eyes locked on Neph's fleeting figure, their unfathomable depths gleaming with a distressing notion. And a moment later, she felt her very existence beginning to grow faint. Because abjuration was done playing with its food. Instead of resisting her attacks, the fiend simply chose to deny Nephis herself, to reject her existence, forcing the world into erasing her completely. How do I resist a deity's will? It was a complicated question, a question that only a handful of people had been forced to ask themselves ever since the nightmare spell descended upon the world. To Nephis, though, the answer was easy. She simply had to break it with her own. She simply had to crush it. If the nightmare creature refused to burn, she had to burn it with more powerful flames. If it refused to be cut, she had to slash it with a sharper blade. If it refused to die, she simply had to convince death to take it. Hey, nightmare creature. Nephis landed on the rubble and slid back, pushed almost to the edge of the water. Her eyes flared with distressing white radiance. Do you think you can snuff me out that easily? Her presence, which had grown faint, suddenly seemed clear, vast, and unfathomable. Abjuration might have been able to negate the existence of a saint, of a weaker sovereign, possibly. But Nephis ruled over and inspired all of humanity. To deny her existence, the creature would have had to erase all of mankind from existence first. To extinguish all of the innumerable stars that illuminated the vast heaven of her soul in an instant. She was changing star. The star of ruin. The goddess of humanity. Nephis did not like these words and had even taken measures to dissuade people from calling her by that title, as well as from worshipping her as a deity. But while she had not undergone apotheosis yet, to some degree, there was truth to what some were saying. For all intensive purposes, she had become the personification of humanity. Her sword was the sword of all humans, and carried the weight of all their hopes and dreams. Of all their longing, her flames were fueled by their desire. How dare you deny me? Snarling, Nephis dashed forward. The blessing was strengthened by all of her soul flame, strengthened more than even her body and soul were due to its flame conduit trait. At the same time, its capacity to overwhelm the will of nightmare creatures was further enhanced by the purifying light trait, the special quality of the shadowbound sword that made it especially lethal to those tainted by the corruption. But, more importantly, it had become the vessel of her will. And her will was fueled by her desire to slay the cursed demon. Desire was the root of all virtues, no less, as well as of all sin. There was hardly a more potent source of willpower than passionate yearning. Burn. Gathering all of her will into the tip of the blade, Nephis moved it in a downward slash, the same downward slash she had practiced myriads of times, until every minuscule detail of performing it flawlessly was absorbed into her very bones. And answering to her will, the world burned. It burned brightly, the stone rubble melting and the dark lake boiling. But that was only the beginning. Because in the next moment, Nephis channeled her will into speaking the words, as well. A frightening verse of linked true names escaped from her lips, summoning fire and destruction upon the world. The intense white flames surged and roared, consuming the very fabric of existence. But Nephis was still not done. Releasing the confines of her mortal shell, she unleashed her true transcendent form. A mass of white flame rose from the ground, easily as tall as the grotesque mountain of gray flash. The flame moved as if it possessed a life of its own, surging forward to meet the cursed demon. As it did, the mass of flames assumed the form of a radiant winged figure wielding a radiant blade. The giant blade woven out of pure white light fell, aiming to sever a dozen of the abomination's severed limbs. The radiance of it all was so blinding that it seemed as if dawn had shone upon the shattered darkness of True Bastion. And, illuminated by that light, the cursed demon cowered, terrified by the memories of the ruthless destructive sky. Of course, naturally, it only faltered for a brief moment. 2439 Heaven and Hell. The world was ablaze. The darkness of the night was vanquished, chased away by an immaculate white abyss of incandescent light. The stone rubble burned, the waters of the vast lake burned, too. Fine particles of superheated dust permeated the air, turning the crumbling ruins into an inescapable furnace. The air itself burned, The sky was suffused with immolating light, turning everything below its merciless expanse into cinders and ash. The boundless ocean of flames roared, its roars fusing and melting together to speak a litany of words. Destruction, ruination, annihilation. At the same time, the world was frigid and frozen, devoid of all warmth. The great lake was covered in ice, frozen solid. Rime and hoarfrost covered the ruins, painting eerie patterns on the stone rubble. The stones themselves had become weak and brittle, ready to break from the smallest touch. Tiny crystals of ice drifted slowly in the frigid air, shining in the pale radiance of the shattered moon. A deep, dead silence enveloped the ruins of the colossal castle. It was a place completely devoid of warmth and life, a place where the very idea of life was strange and abhorrent. The world had been torn in two by the clash between a supreme titan and a cursed demon, its jagged halves fighting for dominance. Nephis had infused her indomitable will into her flames, setting the world on fire. The radiant hell she had unleashed was so terrible that the fabric of reality itself was ignited, and everything around her burned, even the things that had never been meant to burn. At the same time, abjuration rejected the flame. The hideous abomination refused to be burned, and in doing so, it denied the concept of heat itself, turning the world into a frozen inferno. Two opposite worlds had been born from the devastating clash of their wills, both existing side by side as possibilities, neither realized nor entirely abolished, and therefore suspended in a state of undetermined rivalry. As Nephis and abjuration fought, their wills straining against each other, one world or the other took shape for a brief moment or two, becoming reality. Then, the cursed demon would be scorched and burned. A heartbeat later, the flames devouring its hideous body would be extinguished, and Nephis would suddenly find herself being strangled by unbearable cold. This vile thing. She reeled under the pressure of fighting the fallen deity's unfathomable will and authority, of its insidious mastery over the concept of refusal that threatened to deny her very existence, let alone her ability to do the cursed demon harm. At the same time, she had to fight the abomination itself. The dreadful forest of skeletal limbs wreaked havoc across the ruins, exerting such furious might that countless tons of stone rubble were turning into fine dust every moment. Nephis had severed dozens of abjuration's arms already. The blade woven from light sliced the cursed one's flesh and bones easily, setting the bleeding stumps aflame. But the hideous abomination was too powerful and too vast, its ability to twist the absolute laws in its favor too tyrannical. So, she had not escaped from their furious clash unscathed, either. Every time Nephis managed to land a strike, abjuration's hands would tear at her fiery form. The long fingers of the abomination blackened, and its claws cracked the moment it touched the white flames, but every time, some warmth was sapped from Nephis, making her flame a little more feeble, a little less scathing. With each blow she received, her claim to existence became a little fainter. And there was something much more terrifying happening, as well. There were billions of little flames connected to Neph's soul, tied to it by the bonds of longing. They were like tethers that anchored her to the world and reinforced her existence. They were the subjects of her domain. With each blow she received, those flames seemed to grow a little fainter, as well. It was when Nephis realized the fact that she felt something she had not felt in a long, long time. She felt fear. At the start of her battle against abjuration, she had regarded it with derision, assured that the terrifying fiend would not be able to negate her existence, because it would have to negate the existence of all of humanity with her, as well. But now, the cursed demon was doing just that. Billions of people were connected to Nephis and her domain of longing, bestowing her with great power and a nearly inexhaustible ocean of spirit essence. But that connection was a blade that cut both ways. Because Nephis was connected to humanity, an especially insidious enemy could reach across the dark void through her, and follow the rays of beautiful starlight to their source. To humans who had been inspired by her, and whom she was supposed to protect. Abjuration was one such enemy. This cursed demon was old, powerful, and terrifying. It had soared in the boundless heaven as one of the spirits of Sun God's realm before falling into the vile depths of corruption. It had survived the Doom War, outlived the Lord of Light, and spent thousands of years hiding from the merciless radiance of the orphaned sky in the sweltering darkness of Godgrave. And now, it was here, in the hidden remains of True Bastion. Liberated from under the incandescent abyss that had imprisoned it, and free to spread its appalling influence as it wished. There was only one obstacle standing in its way. Two obstacles, really, Changing Star and the Lord of Shadows. And only one of them was here to face the cursed demon now. Nephis bathed in the agony of her flaw, allowing it to purify her mind and steel her resolve. She gathered her flame, she was the flame. Her soul contained the fire. I need to end it now. In this battle of will, she needed to want to end the cursed demon here and now, want to end it so fiercely that her scorching desire could not be denied. So, Nefis reached deep into her heart, remembering every reason she had to want to kill the enemy, and every reason she had to want to prevent the enemy from killing her. To be the last one standing. And then, she spoke a name that she had not been able to invoke before. She invoked the name of passion. 2440 Knowledge of passion. Invoking the name of passion was far more difficult than any other Nefis had ever invoked. Perhaps it was because, unlike the other names, the source of this one was Nefis herself. Her own longing, her own desire, her own yearning, her own passion, she had to know them, to burn with them, to admit them starkly without pretense or falsehood. Then, she had to infuse them into the name, and channel that name with her soul. Shaping the world in accordance with the melody of her heart, and forcing the two to resonate with each other. The act itself was an immensely difficult one. After all, what human was completely honest with themselves? Completely honest about themselves? Who wasn't scared of baring themselves and laying the truth of who they were out in the open for the world to see? For them themselves to see? The first step was difficult, but the second one was arduous. Invoking the name of passion meant drawing it out of herself, and channeling it put more strain on Nef's soul and willpower than she had ever felt before while shaping. But she endured. She endured the cruelly honest moment of self-reflection, with all her selfishness and weakness put on display, and she endured the strain of channeling the name of passion too. She invoked it. She finally succeeded. And when she did, it was as if blinders had been removed from her eyes. Nefis heard the spell whispering into her ear, but she did not have to listen to its loathsome voice to know that she had mastered another branch of her aspect legacy, the memory of light. She had mastered the knowledge of passion. Just as it had happened with the knowledge of fire and the knowledge of destruction, she could enjoy the fruit of her labor. A torrent of information poured into her mind, as if a seal had been broken, completing and complementing what she had already intuitively understood. An underlying understanding of a multitude of matters, an instinctual grasp of subtle secrets and intricate techniques, a collection of names related to passion and desire. It was as if she had spent a lifetime striving to explore and fathom something in theory while simultaneously applying that wealth of knowledge in practice, and was now receiving the fruits of this lived experience without the memories themselves. But that was not important at the moment. Nefis could assess and consolidate the boon of mastering another branch of her aspect legacy later. Right now, she was still reeling from having invoked the name of passion. Channeling that name was like adding fuel to her already scathing desire. Ignited by the invocation of passion, it flared with even greater intensity, emboldened and empowered by her sorcery. Her desire, in turn, augmented and emboldened her will, making it so much more potent. It was like a comprehensive enhancement of her fiery spirit, a cheat-like, self-fulfilling prophecy. It was like something that she had always been meant to possess, but was denied until now. The cornerstone of her entire aspect, or maybe a missing piece that had been preventing her from making the next step. Nefis suddenly felt incredibly alive. Even the terrible agony of her flaw seemed less tortuous, for a moment. The pain was the same, but the suffering it brought her felt not as meaningless, and therefore more bearable. Doubtless, uncompromising, burning with passion. Her will blossomed with unreserved heat, and that was enough to break the stalemate between her authority and that of the cursed demon. The world, which had been torn in two, was finally restored to being whole again. The frigid hell of abjuration's creation was vanquished, and the incandescent inferno of purifying flames was actualized, settling to take its lawful place in reality. And so, just like Nefis had promised, abjuration burned. Opening square bracket ... You have slain abjuration. Having assumed her human form, Nefis fell to her knees and gasped, clutching at her chest. She tried to draw air into her scorched lungs, but there was no air left for her to inhale. All of it had been burned away, turning the ruins of True Bastion into an incandescent, suffocating desert. The crumbling castle was no more, turned into a vast plain of glowing, white-hot slag. The lake was gone, too, its dark waters turned into clouds of superheated plasma. The remains of the city that had been hidden below the lake, and the bones of its former citizens, had turned to ash. Arg! Nefis tried to grow but without air to carry her voice, there was no sound. She closed her mouth and gritted her teeth, enduring the pain in silence. Even after she had overpowered the will of the cursed demon by invoking the name of passion, their battle lasted for a long while. She had dealt the insidious abominations plenty of grievous wounds, and received more than a few of them herself in return. Her body was immaculate and pristine, but her soul was in shambles. She had burned her soul cores, as well, damaging a few of them almost to the point of breaking. But since she was a half-breed who was born of two worlds, belonging to neither, she could absorb the soul fragments of nightmare creatures slain by her flames just like she would those of humans. Abjuration had been a cursed demon, and an ancient one at that, so, her cores were now rebuilding themselves, having received a generous infusion of soul fragments. After the abomination's death, just abjuration, it seemed like the spell did not deem it worthy to even mention the rank and class of cursed nightmare creatures when announcing their deaths. It made sense, really. After all, there had been only one abjuration in the world. It was one of a kind, so no one would confuse it with some other horror bearing the same name. Nephise looked around, drowning in the heat of the brilliant hell of her own creation. It was going to take a long time for True Bastion to cool off. And there was no reason for her to remain here anymore. On the contrary, there were plenty of reasons for her to leave as soon as possible. Even though she was not channeling the name of passion anymore, she could still feel its aftereffects. Usually, she would be drained of all feelings and emotions after abusing her aspect so thoroughly, but today, Nephise was full of them instead. She wanted to return to Illusory Bastion. She wanted to revel in delicious food, to satiate her thirst with fragrant wine, to soothe her tired body with the cold caress of water and luxuriate in its embrace. She wanted to meet Sunny. She longed for him with such intensity that it felt a little frightening. Let's go. Holding her breath, she had no choice but to. Nephise rose to her feet and looked around one last time. The corpse of abjuration had turned to ash. There were no soul shards left to collect since she had already absorbed the soul fragments. She was standing near one of the deep cracks formed on the mountain during the siege of Bastion. It was dark and seemingly bottomless, leading far down. There was nothing left for her to do here. Nephise turned, intending to return. But then, something scraped beneath her feet. Frowning, she bent down and picked up a small piece of broken glass that had been laying on the edge of the fissure, the only cold thing in the white-hot furnace of the annihilated ruins. The piece of glass was blackened by soot, but when she scraped it with a nail, a fiery white eye looked back at her FGOM beneath. It was the reflection of her own eye, and the white flame dancing in its depths. A mirror. Nephise threw one last look into the dark fissure, her frown growing deeper. Then, she tossed the fragment of the shattered mirror away and turned around. It was time for her to leave. Ravenheart awaited.